So we have not only loops are used not only for generating the data, we have other purposes as well. Uh, so we also call loops. Using loops, what we can do is we can process the data iteratively. We can also call iterating. This concept is also called processing data iteratively. Means you process your data based on your iteration. In each iteration, based on the conditions whatever you specify, based on those conditions it gets executed. The data, I mean the SAS statements get executed. So in this concept, processing data iteratively, how do you process your data iteratively? In this concept, loop is one of the concept. Do loop is one of the concept. We also have arrays, all those things, but do loop is one of the concept. uh, So we saw yesterday how to process your data using do loop. How to process your data using do loop. So what is the purpose of do loop? So you can generate your data. You can generate your data. You can eliminate the redundant code. You can process. You can process your data conditionally. Conditionally, if the condition is true, then only you have to execute. Otherwise, you will not. Give me 1 minute. I'm sorry. Give me 1 minute. Just need to send the link. So you can generate data using do loops. So you can eliminate redundant code. Means if you want, I mean, eliminate redundant code in the sense, uh, let's say you wanted to run the same conditions, same SAS statements from 2001 year to 2010 year. So you can eliminate the redundant code using do loops, and you can conditionally execute your code. We'll see all these things. What do you mean by generate data? What do you mean by eliminate redundant code? And what do you mean by conditionally execute the code? We'll see all these examples. Okay. So yesterday we discussed this, but still I'll reiterate. So do loop processing. So so in do see we saw right in yesterday how to use this do loop. So in do you'll write here. In do you write some statement here. When I say statement, we saw yesterday I equals to 1 to 1 to, I mean it's not statement, do statement. This is do statement. This is, in do statement, what do you write in do statement? You write these conditions I equals to 1 to 10, 1 to 10 by 1 or by 2 or whatever. So first you'll have do statements, and inside the do statement you have all the SAS statements, whatever you wanted to iterate. What do you mean by iterated SAS statements? Means which will repeat. Iterated in the sense it repeats, right? If the condition is true, if I say I equals to 1 to 10 by 2, so loop will run till the condition is failing. So all the statements inside the do statements are called iterated SAS statements, and do statement ends with end statement. And prior to do statement, you can have SAS statements. You can have SAS statements, and after the do statement, you can have SAS statements. You can have SAS statements. So this SAS statement, when this SAS statements will run, and when this SAS statements will run. Okay. So this we'll see all those examples. So for the time being, what you have to understand here is prior to do statement or do block or do loop, you can have SAS statements, and after the do statement also. After this end statement also you can have SAS statements. Any SAS statements you can have it. So statements within do loop. Whatever statements you have within do loop will execute for a specific number of iterations. Specific number of iterations or iterations, anything is fine. So if I say I equals to 1 to 10, if I say I equals to 1 to 10, and by 1, the total number of iterations here are 10. The total number of iterations here are 10. If I say I equals to 1 to 10 by 2, so total number of iterations will be 5. First, it will start with 1 and it will add 2. Next time the I value will be 3. Next time I value will be 5, 7, come on 9. So the number of iterations, it depends on the condition whatever you give it here, right? So statements within a do loop execute for a specific number of iterations or until a specific condition stops the loop. So all the iterated SAS statements will execute until a specific condition stops, or the number of iterations depends on this condition whatever you specify in the do statement. Okay. So do loop processing, you can use do loops to perform repetitive calculations. When I say repetitive calculations, what do you mean by repetitive calculations? Now let's say you have invested some $10,000 in 2010. Okay. Now if I ask you what will be my amount, what will I get at the end of 2016 if I invest $10,000 $10,000 in 2010, assuming the rate of interest is 10%, okay, compounded annually. Okay, so in what you have to do by considering this principal amount, you have to calculate what will be the total amount at the end of 2010, again at the end of 2011, at the end of 2012, at the end of 2013, 14, 15, 16. So for each year, whatever calculation you are doing, that calculation will iterate, right? And the calculation will iterate. So repetitive calculation, the same SAS statement you have to repetitively execute for each year. So you can use the do loops to perform any repetitive calculation. Repetitive calculation you can use it, or generate the data. If you want to generate the data, you can use do loops. What do you mean by generate the data? If you remember, yesterday we created a column called, or a variable called sales date, in which we captured all the values starting from 1st April 2016 to 30 April 2016. So what you are doing there, you are not doing any calculations, but you are generating the data. You are generating the data. So do loops can be used to generate the data as well. Do loops can be used to generate the data and to perform the repetitive calculation. And do loops to eliminate the redundant code. What do you mean by redundant code? What do you mean by redundant code? If you remember in yesterday session, I have explained you how to generate various reports, or how to create various reports for for distinct age categories. For 11 age, for 12 age, for 13 age, I want separate reports. I want separate reports, right? So no need of writing every time proc foreign data equals to SAS help dot class where age equals to 11. So no need of writing n number of times the same SAS statements. So you can eliminate the redundant code. You can eliminate the redundant code using loops. Okay, so we can use it to perform repetitive calculations, to generate the data, to eliminate redundant code, and execute SAS code conditionally based on condition. Based on some condition, we execute this code. Based on the condition, we execute the SAS code, right? So these are some of the characteristics, or some of the some of the key points which we can use using do loops. Using do loops, what we can do. These are the things which we can do. Okay. Okay. Let's see this example. Let's see. The first one is repetitive calculations. First one is repetitive calculations. Do loops are used to perform repetitive calculations, right? Let's see the repetitive what do you mean by repetitive calculations? So let's say this is the question. Compare the interest for yearly versus quarterly compounding on $50,000 investment made for 1 year at 7.5% interest. So they are asking us to compare interest for yearly versus quarterly compounding. Let's say if you when I say yearly versus quarterly compounding, it means there are two things here which you need to calculate. One is interest you need to calculate for yearly and the other one for quarterly. So for each quarter you need to calculate interest separately, and for yearly also you need to calculate interest. Let's say you have invested and you said compounded yearly or compounded quarterly. Okay, then how much will a person accrue in each situation? Means how much you will get in each situation. When I say each situation here, there are two situations. One is interest you have to calculate for yearly, the other one you have to calculate for quarterly, right? Okay, if you look at this program, here I have not used loops, but it's a simple, what is the meaning of repetitive coding? I'm trying to explain here. Or repetitive calculation or repetitive coding or repetitive calculations. I'm trying to explain the repetitive calculation here. So initially, a person invested $50,000. So the amount would be 50,000. So I have declared a variable called amount and I have assigned value 50,000. And rate of interest it's 7.5%. So 7.5 divided by 100. So it will be 0.075. So they have given here 0.075. So 7.5 divided by 100. So if you want to calculate, uh, interest, if you want to calculate interest at yearly rate, so you simply divide this amount into rate. Simply divide amount into rate. So what do you get here? If you divide amount into rate, you will get interest rate. Interest amount. I'm sorry, interest amount. Do you remember the interest formula? Maybe you might be learning in your school days or whatever. There is a formula, right? PTR by 100. Interest equals to some formula you have it. This is simple interest. For compound interest, you have a separate formula. So let's see the calculations here. Concentrate on the repetitive coding. Forget about the formula of simple interest or compound interest. Concentrate on the repetitive coding. So here we calculated yearly interest. Yearly equals to amount into rate. If you multiply amount into rate, then you'll get the interest for that year. Or the okay. Coming to, they have asked to calculate quarterly also, right? Quarterly. Okay. Now when it executes the first statement, what is the value that we have in quarterly? It's 0. When it executes this statement, it is 0, right? We don't have any value. We didn't declare any quarterly variable here. So it's 0. Okay. 0 plus amount. And what is the amount? It's 50,000. So 50,000. So 0 plus 50,000 would be, what is the value? It's 50,000. So on this $50,000, we apply the rate of interest. So what is the rate of interest? It's rate divided by 4. Why we have given 4? So we need to calculate on quarterly basis. So we have 4 quarters. So I am dividing this 0.75 to 0.075 by 4. And what is the meaning of, we discussed earlier in SAS, if we say A plus B, just say, if you say A plus B, what is the meaning of this A plus B in SAS? A equals to A plus B, right? If in first dot variable, last dot variable, when I explained that concept, we discussed this thing. We discussed this. So if I say principal plus interest. Let's say if I say principal plus interest, what is the meaning of principal plus interest in SAS? It's nothing but principal equals to principal plus interest. In the same way here, there is an expression here which they are using. One is quarterly and the other one is this entire thing. So let's assume quarterly is A, this entire thing is B. So A plus B. So what is the meaning of A plus B in SAS? It's nothing but A equals to A plus B. So the meaning of this one is quarterly equals to quarterly plus amount into rate by 4. Okay, so q plus quarterly plus quarterly plus amount into r by 4. That's the meaning of this statement. Okay, so initially quarterly you have not defined, so it will be 0. So it will calculate a rate of interest on this 50,000. So whatever value you get, let's say you got some $1,000. So that $1,000 will be stored in quarterly in the first iteration. In quarterly you have 1,000. Means the interest rate you got is, when the interest amount you got is, let's say it's $1,000. Let's say for example. Now when it executes the second statement, so and now in quarterly you will have 1,000 rupees, because in the first statement when it executed as this statement, in quarterly you have 1,000. It created 1,000 in quarterly variable. So 1,000 will be replaced here. 1,000 plus amount. What do you mean by 1,000 plus amount? This is the interest amount plus your principal amount. It's 50,000. Okay, 50,000. So now you are calculating again rate of interest. It's quarterly basis, right? So 0.075 divided by 4. So now this time when you calculate the second time, you consider your principal amount invested less you earned interest in the last year. So you'll add both, and that will be your principal. For the next year. Okay. So on that amount, again you apply percentage, you get something, you'll get some rate of interest, and that you will put it in again quarterly. So it will repeat. So for each quarter we are repeating these statements. So instead of doing this, you can write a loop. So because the same set of statements or the same statement you are executing n number of times. The same statement you are executing n number of times here, right? Okay. So any questions on this slide before I go ahead and before I move? Any questions on this slide? Anyone? Any questions? So in the first, okay, let me ask you this question. So when it executes this statement, what will be the value? What all the variables after executing this statement? What all the variables we have? So we have amount, rate, yearly interest, and a new variable got created. What is that? Quarterly. Quarterly is the new variable which got created, right? And when it executes initially, this quarterly value is not available, right? It is not initialized anywhere. It is not initialized. So this quarterly variable will have 0, and it will perform the calculations. So when it executes the second statement, then you will have some value in quarterly. So it will pick that value and it will perform the calculation. So when you print it, This will be your output: amount, rate, yearly interest, and quarterly. Why you will get only this output? Why you will not get output for each iteration? Why you will not get output for each iteration? Because you don't have any output statement mentioned in this code. We have not mentioned any output statement, so the values will overwrite. The values will keep on overwriting. In the first iteration, amount will be 50,000. I mean, when it initially 50,000, and B value would be, not B value, that rate value will be 0.75, 0.075, and yearly it calculates amount into rate, that is 3750. Okay, when it executes this statement, it found a new variable called quarterly, right? So it creates a new variable quarterly. Initially it is 0, it will assign to 0. Now after evaluating this expression, you'll get some value. Let's say it's 100, for example. Okay, next, when it evaluates the second expression, amount will retain as it is. Principal rate of interest will not change. This yearly part will not change, but quarterly amount will change. Let's say it is 200 now. In the third, when it executes this third statement, let's say it is 400. When it executes this fourth statement, let's say it is 500. Now we don't have any other statements, right? We need to execute run statement. When we execute run statement, what all the values we have in those variables, that will be printed in the output. So every time this value will overwrite. This quarterly value will overwrite. So that's the reason you'll have only one record. So if you invest $50,000 with 7.5 interest rate on yearly, I mean, let's say interest is calculated at yearly basis or compounded yearly, then you'll get $3750 as an interest. But if you say compounded quarterly, you'll get $3,800. And what if you want to determine the quarterly compound interest after a period of 20 years? Let's say the same thing you wanted to do it for 20 years. This is 1 year, right? This is for 1 year. This is for 1 year. Let's say you wanted to do it for 20 years. So you cannot write 80 statements. It's very hard for us. I mean, it's very difficult or tedious task. It's very tedious task to write 80 statements. So what you have to do? You have to use loops. When you have repetitive coding, you have to use loops. So what is the ideal way for the previous, whatever we have seen, what is the ideal way? So what you have to do is you need to run a loop. Instead of writing 4 different statements, you can run a loop. So you can run a loop for 4 times. You can run a loop for 4 times because this statement needs to execute 4 times, right? So you can run a loop for 4 times. So do quarter equals to 1 to 4. If you want to do it for 80 quarters, they will say 1 to 80. And this is the syntax for do statement. So the iterative or iterative, we can call it either iterative or iterative, it's up to you. The iterative do statement executes statements between do and end statements. Between do and end statement repetitively. Whatever statements you have between do and end, those statements will execute repetitively based on the value of an index variable. Based on the values of an index variable, whatever you specify, based on that, it will execute. So this is the general syntax. Do you whatever you write, whatever variable you create in the do statement, that is called index variable, or you can also call it as a loop variable. So you will start with some specific value and you stop at some specific value, and by you can give either increment or decrement value. You can use either increment or decrement value here. So this is the syntax. If you say do I equals to 1 to 10, 1 to 10 by 1 or by 2, it means index variable will start with 1 and it will go till 10. Stop value is 10, start value is 1, and every time I wanted to increment by 2. So what will I have in I? So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. For these 5 values, inside the do statement, whatever SAS statements you have, that will execute. So the values of start, stop and increment must be numbers. This can be a number or it can be an expression also. It can be an expression also. Expression that yields numbers. What do you mean by expressions that yield numbers? Expression that yield number. So for example, if I write do I equals to, sorry, do I equals to, let's say you wanted to write some year of some variable, to year of some variable. So some expression, if you use any expressions, it's not mandated that you have to directly enter the value. I mean, you can hard code the value. You can also use some expressions that yield numbers. I mean, let's say for example, you write dates like 01 June 2016. What you do, you put it in quotes, right? You put it in quotes, you end with D. So after that expression is evaluated, if it returns a number, that's fine. You can use in start. And are established before executing the loop. So before executing the loop itself, you define all the start value, stop value, all those things. And any changes to the values of stop or increment made within the do loop do not affect the number of iterations. Any changes to the values of stop or increment made within the do loop. Let's say you have, anything within the loop means inside the loop. If you have made any changes to this increment or stop, what do you mean by that? We'll see in later examples. But whatever, once you write do statement, whatever you write it in do statement, that will be executed. You cannot modify the stop and increment. You cannot modify the stop and increment inside the loop. You cannot stop the increment values or stop values inside the loop. Okay, these are some of the examples. So you can so do I equals to 1 to 12. So how many times loop will execute? It executes 12 times. When I value is 13, it's out of range. So it won't execute the SAS statements. Like whatever statements you have inside the do statement, whatever you have mentioned inside between the do statement and end statement, whatever statements you write, that will be executed only 12 times. When the I value is 13, since it's out of the range, it won't execute. So if you say j equals to 2 to 10 by 2, so again here loop will execute how many times loop will execute? It started with 2. So you are saying to execute till 10 value only. The maximum value is 10. So every time you are incrementing by 2. So j values will be 2 followed by 4 because you are incremented by 2. By default, if you don't specify any by keyword in the do statement, its default by the default nature is by 1. It will increment the value by 1. If you explicitly specify, then it will increment the value. It will increment the loop value every time by that number whatever you specify here. So when the I value is 12, it is failing. The condition will fail, so it will come out of the loop. And if you want to read it in reverse order, let's say you want 10, 9, 8, 7, or let's say you wanted to create values, date values from 30th April to 1st April. So you can read it in reverse order as well. See, if I say here in this example, k equals to 14 to 2 by minus 2. So it starts with 14. Okay, so the condition would be whether, so 14 to 2, right? So every time you have to deduct 2 values. So 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. So it will check, each condition will be checked whether this is greater than the 2 or not. 14 greater than 2. Yes, it is true. 12 greater than or equals to 2. Yes, it is true. 10 greater than or equals to 2. Yes, it is true. 8 greater than or equals to 2. 6 greater than or equals to 2, 4 greater than or equals to 2, 2 greater than or equals to 2, yes. What is the next value? It's 0. 0 is greater than or equals to 2, no, false. So it will fail. So 14, 12, 10, 6, 2, when it is 0, it is out of range. Next is the last one, m equals to 3.6 to 3.8 by 0.05. So the same thing, you can also, since it's a number, it will add, keep on adding 5, and if it is out of the range, when the value is 3.85, it's out of range, so it will terminate the loop. This is one of the important point. See, whatever you write here, like you'll write 1 to 10, right? You'll write I equals to 1 to 10. It's not mandatory that you have to use only numbers. Let's say you can, let's say you have a variable called month. You have a variable called month. So in this month the values are stored something like Jan, Feb, March, something like this. Now I wanted to run loop for Jan value, Feb value. For each value in this variable I wanted to run the loop. Let's say for example. So you can also specify character values. You can also specify character values. So item 1 through item n can be either all numeric or all character constants. They can be character constants or they can be variables as well. They can be variables as well. This is important. They can be variables. When you say variables, let's say you have a data set, you have m1, you have m2, you have m3, some variables. Let's say some variables. Now I wanted to perform the same. I wanted to perform some calculations on m1. I wanted to perform some calculations on m2 variable, and I wanted to do some more manipulations to m3 variable. So it can be variable as well. Like m1, I can write I equals to m1 to m2, m3. I can write it in this way. Or you can provide the list of variables as well. We'll see all those things sometime. The do loop is executed once for each value in the list. So for each value in the list, the loop will execute. What do you mean by each value in the list? If we say 1 to 10, so what are the list of values we have here? 1, 2, 3, you have these are the list in that loop, right? So for each value, the loop will execute at least once. For each value, the loop will execute at least once. So these are some of the examples. Okay, now can you tell me in this example, okay, the first example, how many times, you have to tell me how many times each loop will execute. See here, how many times will each do loop execute? In the first example, how many times it executes? It executes, you have provided three values. So for Jan, and these are character constants. These are character constants. So it will execute 3 times in the first case. In the second case, it's a Fibonacci series. But still, how many times you have 21 values you have provided. So instead of writing I equals to fib equals to 1 to 21, they wanted to execute the loop when fib value is either 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 or 13 or 21. So you can write it in this way, or else you can also specify variable names. You can specify variable names. When you can assign the variable names to index variable, and j equals to begin date to today date by 7. So uh, so here begin date is, so here you can, here the begin date, what is the begin date? It's a variable, right? Begin date is a variable. Begin date is a variable. uh, So it's saying unknown. Why we are saying unknown? Because we don't know the begin date. And even though you know that, let's say today is 27th July, but you don't know the begin date, so we cannot tell how many days it runs, how many times the loop iterates. We cannot tell at this point in time, but this will execute. Why they are saying unknown? Because the number of iterations depends on the values of begin date and today date. Since we don't know begin date, we cannot tell the number of iterations. But let's say if I give you begin date is nothing but 1st July 2016. Now can you tell me the number of iterations? Yes, we can tell, right? Because we have the begin date, we have the current date. So every time you wanted to increment by 7, so it will be 1st July, 8th July, 21st 15th July, 21st July. That's it. For only for 4, we will have 4 iterations. Okay, if you know the begin date, we can tell it. So we can also write it in this way, in the loop. And the last one here, it's an interesting thing. So what do you mean by this? K equals to test 1 minus test 50. If you write in this way, it will execute only one time. A single value of K is determined by subtracting test 50 from test 1. It will execute only one thing. If you want to, let's say you have 50 variables, test 1 to test 50, and you wanted to run the loop for each value of test, I mean test 1, test 2, test 3, you have to use double hyphens. If you use one hyphen, it will treat that it's an expression. It will treat it as an expression. But if you use double hyphen, then it will treat it as, okay, test 1 to test 50. If you have any variables, then it will treat, what do you mean by test 1 hyphen test 1 hyphen hyphen or dash dash test 50? It means consider all the variables between test 1 and test 50. Consider all the variables between test 1 and test 50. But if you simply say hyphen, single hyphen, if it is a single hyphen or dash, then it will treat it as an expression. If you use double hyphens or double dash, then it will treat all the variables in between test 1 and test 50. So do loops iterate within the normal looping process of data step? I mean, so let me explain this PDV concept on, I mean, this coming Saturday. I'll take a session on PDV vector, how SAS, how many phases we have in SAS, the execution, what it does in the execution phase, and what it does in the compilation phase. So we'll take all the examples anyway, now combining SAS datasets and all, right. We'll see how SAS internally processes those codes. How SAS internally processes those codes, we'll see on Saturday. Okay, I'll take a session on Saturday. I will see how to work on all these things. I mean, theoretical concept. We'll see all these PDV vectors. Now let's see this one more example. Perform repetitive calculations. Perform repetitive calculations. Okay, now what you want to do is, on Jan 1 of each year, let's say you are investing 5,000. On Jan 1 of each year, you are investing 5,000 in an account, and now they are asking to determine the value of the account after 3 years based on the constant annual interest rate, 7.5%. Okay, so every year you are investing 5,000, right? And you have to calculate the total amount that you will get at the end of, uh, let's say 2003. So let's say you have invested in 2001. You have invested amount in 2001. Okay, you have invested amount in 2001, $5,000. Annual interest rate is 7.5. The same example earlier, whatever we seen, the same thing. So I have to run loop from 2001 to 2003 based on whatever year, it's up to you. I mean, based on the requirement. If it is 2011 to 2016, we'll say 2011 to 2016. Now here I wanted to run loop from 2001 to 2003. I have not specified any by here, so by default it will increment one time. The loop will run how many times in this case? It will run 4 times. Sorry, 3 times. I'm sorry. The loop will run 3 times. So for 3 years, right? 2001, 2002, and 2003. Now here, what is the loop variable? Loop variable is year. Here the loop variable is year. So year equals to, it starts at 2001, and what is the condition? Year less than or equals to 2003, right? So it will go inside the loop. So what is the value for capital? You have not given anything. You have not given any value for capital. So you have not defined anything for capital. So you have not initialized, right? So by default, when it encounters any new values or any new variable names inside the do loop, it will assign as 0. It will assign 0. Okay. Now 0 plus 5,000. 0 plus 5,000. It's 5,000. Where it will store? It will store in capital. It will store in capital. It will store in capital. Capital. So capital equals to capital plus 5,000. So when it executes this statement, in capital you'll have 5,000 and it will execute the second SAS statement. So on 5,000, what we are trying to do, we are calculating the interest rate 7.5, and whatever interest you get, I wanted to add it to capital. So let's say you have 0.075 on 5,000. Let's say it is some $125, for example. Let's say it's $125. So 125 will be added to capital. What is the capital? $5,000. So $5,125. So after executing for in first iteration for 2000 year, for the year 2001, the value in the capital would be 5125. Now again it will execute this loop for 2003. So what is so so what will be the capital amount now at the starting of second year 2002? So already you have earned $125 in the previous year, and in the very first year you invested 5,000. So total you have 5,125, and you're adding again you're investing $5,000. So the total amount would be 5,000. Here you have 5,125, and here you are investing again 5,000, because you said that every year you invest 5,000, right? So it will be 10,125. Now on 10,125, I need to calculate interest at 7.5%, and whatever value I get, I will store it in capital. So in this way, this loop will execute. So this is how it executes internally. When it executes data statement, so what it does is, so it will first scan this data set, and it will create a vector called PDV, which I'll explain you on Saturday. PDV stands for program data vector. Program data vector. Program data vector means using this, program data vector is nothing but it's an area of memory where SAS processes the records. So PDV vector is an area of memory where SAS processes all its records. Okay. So I'll explain in detail on Saturday. So when we start executing data equals to invest, so it will whatever values you have, whatever variables you have, that with those variables it will create a vector. So here capital, and there is a default underscore n underscore. Underscore n underscore is nothing but iteration number. So when it start reading in the initial stage, all the values in the PDV vector will be missing. So let me go back here. So when it starts reading this data investment, let me come here. So why capital equals to 0? Why capital equals to 0 here? The reason is you don't have any defined capital, you have not defined anywhere. So it is 0 initially, and in here it is dot. It is dot in the sense it is missing. It will assign missing values to the variables. So what? So here you have values, right? Here we'll have 2001 to 2003. So the initial value it will initialize with missing, and when it executes the do loop, when it starts executing the do statement, so what is the value you have in here? It's 2001. So it will replace with 2001. So year value is 2000. Capital equals to 0. It's the first iteration. So underscore n underscore value will be 1. So when it executes this statement, capital plus 5,000, what is the value what is how it executes? So capital plus 5,000, where it will store? It will store in capital only. Capital 5 plus 5,000 means capital equals to capital plus 5,000. So 0 plus 5,000, again it will store in capital only. So you will have 5,000 in the first iteration. In the first iteration you will have 5,000. Now When it executes the next SAS statement, capital plus capital into 0.075. So 5000 into 0.75, whatever you get, that will again, and this is the interest rate. So that will be added to capital itself, because the meaning of capital plus capital into 0.075, the meaning of this one is C equals to C plus C is capital C into 0.075. So this is the meaning of here, capital plus capital into 0.75. So it will add the interest rate to the capital, and this will be your new capital now. So you got 5375 at the end of first year. At the end of first year, the total amount that which is there in the bank is 5000, the initial amount you invested, plus you earned an interest of $305. Now let me go here. Now what will happen? It will increment the loop value. Why loop value is included? Because it reached the end of the SAS statements, so it will not terminate because the condition is still true. So year value will increase. So year value is 2001. Now it will be incremented by 1. Now year value will be 2002. Right? Year value is 2002. Next. So it will check for the condition whether out of the range or not. If it is true, what it does, it will execute the statements again. And for some reason this underscore n underscore is not changing. It is still showing 1, but it will change actually. Okay, that is not 1, that is 2. In the same way, to keep on executing this. So when it will fail, it will keep on checking whether here is out of range. If it is out of range, then what will happen? It will terminate the loop. It will come out of the loop. It will come out of the loop. Okay. When it failed, what values you have? In the output? So when year value is 2004, it failed, and this is the capital amount, and this will be dropped. This underscore and underscore, it won't write it into the output data set, because this underscore is temporarily it creates, so this won't write it. So it will write only one observation, that is year 2004 and 17364. So only this observation will be written into output data set. So write observation to invest. So when the loop is terminating, at that time, what values you have in that PDB vector, it will pick all those values and it will write it into output data set. It will write it into output SAS data set. So this is what you get it at the end of after executing that code. Why you get only one value? Since you have not specified any output statement. If you specify output statement after this statement, then then what it does, in each iteration, whatever values you have in year and capital, that will be written into output data set. So this is output statement. Generate a separate observation for each year. See, this is very important standard certification question. What they do is they give you this question for sure. Same for sure, 100%. This is they'll give one question, the same question. You'll this kind of questions only you'll have in certification exams. Based on certification exam, you'll have this question. So what they do is they'll not use output statement. They'll not mention output statement. Then they'll ask what will be the value. I mean, in the options you'll have 2003 and this 17364, and also you'll have 2004 17364. So you'll have these two options. In the multiple choice questions, you'll have these two values. So condition fails. When condition failed, when the loop failed, or when the loop terminated, what values you have in the year and capital, that will be printed if you ignore the output statement. But if you mention the output statement, then what will happen? It for each observation or for each iteration, it will write that record into output data set. So you'll get the output in this fashion. So based on your need, you have to whether, I mean, you need to decide whether to use output statement or not. So why is the here, see here, why is the value of year is not equals to 2004 in the last observation? Why? It failed, right? It failed. So when it fails, when the loop fails, this statement doesn't execute. This output statement doesn't execute for 2004. See, when loop value is, see, when year value is 2001, then it will execute all these statements. When year value is 2002, then it will execute all these statements inside the do and end in between whatever you have, that will execute. When I value is 2003, yes, it will execute these statements. But when I value is 2004, it will come out of this loop. It will end the do loop and it will come out. So these statements will not execute. So I value or the year value won't be 2004. Any questions so far? Let me stop here and see if there are any questions. Anyone? Anyone? I have not seen this chart. Number of weeks. I'm sorry, Rohit, I didn't follow you. So if you want to run the loop from first observation till last observation dynamically, yes, you can do that. How you will do? Dynamically in the sense, what do you mean by dynamically, Raghav? Means it has to fetch automatic. So it has to fetch the number of, I mean, values for loop. I mean that I equals to 1 to 10, that I and 10, I mean 1 and 10, it has to fetch automatically.
Yes, like every time we are doing, we are specifically
So
saying
you have to
loop
use,
I.
yeah, you have to use macros for that. Okay,
Okay.
you have to use macros for that.
Because okay. Because what I was saying is I was wanting to know any keyword by which we will get the last observation automatically, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
it will
So
run.
yesterday I have explained you that program, right? So we have taken distinct values and we have executed. So 11 here we will get automatically 11 to 16. So how we are getting based on the macro variables. Okay. Or if you want to explicitly get the last value, yes, you can. So again, you have to create macro variables only for that. So let's say there is a function called calls input. This is macro related coding. Let's say x comma. Let's say you wanted to count the number of observations in SAS user dot payroll master. Okay, and I wanted to, let's say here, I'll write here, there is an option called dataset option, end equals to, I can write last here. Let me let me say, okay, now let me run this, or I can simply ignore this value as well, not a problem. See, next I have value 148, so I can use this x to run the loop from 1 to x. So x in the sense ampersand x. So you can do it using macro coding. You cannot do it in this. You cannot get the value automatically in data step program. Okay. I mean, you have in data step you have to include the macro concept as well. Otherwise, you cannot get it automatically. So macros are mainly used for automations. So you will be using macros and create some variables, and you can pass those variable values. You can automate it without any manual intervention. You can write the programs using macros. So any other questions? Okay. The same example. I mean, if you want, I mean, the same thing. Year one, year two, year three. If you have 30 years, then it's not possible to write 30 statements, right? So you can write a loop, the same program. Okay. So we also have. Can anyone tell what is the meaning of do while and do until? The do while statement and do until statement. So what is the difference between do until, do while? You might have seen, I mean, you might have learned other things as well, right? I mean, in the other programming language. See, now in this do while, first we'll check the condition. We will not initialize here. First we'll check the condition. So if this condition is true, then only we will execute the SAS statements. Then only we'll execute the SAS statement. In case of do while, okay, the do while statement executes SAS statements in a do loop. In this loop, it will execute whatever the conditions you have mentioned or SAS statements you have mentioned. It will execute only if the condition is true. So expression is evaluated at the top of the loop. Expression is evaluated at the top of the loop. The statements in the loop never execute if the expression is initially false. If the expression is initially false. Let's see an example. Uh, and the difference between do until and do while is do until it will execute all the it will execute the statements and it will check for the condition. Later on it will check the condition. For example, the do until statement executes statements in a do loop until a condition is true. Sorry. Yeah. So here until a condition is true, so expression is evaluated at the bottom of the loop. The statement in the loop are executed at least once. So to make it simple, it will execute at least once these SAS statements, and at the end, when it checks for the condition, if let's say it is failing, then it will terminate. So it will check the condition at the end. It will not check the condition in the initial. Let me explain through an example. Determine the number of years it would take for an account to exceed $1 million if 5,000 is invested annually at 7.5%. So determine the number of years it would take for an account to exceed $1 million if 5,000 is invested annually at 7.5%. Okay. Let's say for example you are investing 5,000 every year, $5,000 every year. How much time it will take to exceed $1 million? That's the question. The interest rate is 7.5. So here you have to execute this loop until which condition is true. See, first you have to when I'm using do until here, here until is nothing but it will keep on executing. It will first execute this value. So it will execute this statement, it will execute this statement, it will execute this statement. Once these statements are executed, it will check the condition. It will check the condition. Okay, it will check for the condition. If this condition is true, then it will again keep on repeating the statements whatever you have. When the condition is failing, it will terminate. So in case of do until, here first, so what we want is we wanted to know how many years it will take to accumulate $1 million. So first what you have to do, you have to calculate, right? You have to calculate whether it is $1 million or not. If it is $1 million, then you have to check the condition. I mean, you have to check the condition. Once you execute all these statements, you need to check for the condition. So in case of until, first we execute the statements and it will check for the conditions. For example, here initially in this program, if you look at here, I mentioned I need to start from year 1, right? So year will be 0. So year plus 1. So what is the meaning of year plus 1? Year equals to year plus 1. So year is 1. So you are initializing a variable 1 here. Next, initializing a variable here, and you have invest every year you are investing 5,000, right? So capital plus 5,000. There is no way. I'm not I'm not initializing capital variable. So here it will be 0. Capital is 0. 0 plus 5,000. It will be 5,000. So capital equals to capital plus 5,000. And in this case, what you are trying to do, whatever interest you are calculating, that you will add it to capital. Now let's see the execution part. So it took 38 years. It took 38 years to exceed $1 million. This is what I want. So how? Let's see. Did you get this? In whatever I'm trying to explain, did you get it? See, what I'm trying to explain here is, I want to find the number of years it took to accumulate $1 million. So here you need to first execute the statements and you need to check for the condition. If the condition is true, then you have to stop executing the statements. See, earlier in do loop, what we have done, if the condition is failing, then we stopped executing, right? Here, if the condition is true, then we have to stop executing the statements. And in case of do until, we keep on executing these statements. We keep on executing the statements inside the do until, whatever you have, we keep on executing till this condition is true. Okay. So the iterative do statement with a condition clause. Okay. So you can combine do while and do until statements with iterative do statements. So what do you mean by, let's see. Okay, the same thing. What they are trying to say here is the iterative do statement with a condition clause. You can also use the iterative do statement with a condition clause. So you can combine do while and do until statements along with iterative do statements. We have seen earlier do statement. You can include this do while and do until in the iterative do statements. Example, do index variable start to stop by increment. In the same do statement, you can use either do while or do until. So this is one of the method of avoiding an infinite loop in do while or do until statement. Let me explain to an example. Let's see an example. Determine the return of the account. Stop the loop if 25 years is reached or more than 2005. $250,000 is accumulated. Now let's say you are asked how much time it will take to accumulate $250,000, or if it is 25 years, you have to stop it. Let's say in 25 years time frame you have not accumulated $250,000, you have to stop there. Okay. Here the question is, you have to run a loop. You have to run a loop 25 times. 25 times, or if the amount is accumulated 250,000, if the amount is accumulated $250,000 dollars. Let's say in the year 15, you are, at the end of 15th year you accumulated $250,000. Then I should not run loop 25 years. I know I should not run loop 25 times. I should stop there itself. So here you have to run the loop based on the condition. You have to run the loop based on the condition. So iterative do statement with a condition clause. See, iterative do statement is nothing but your do I equals to 1 to 10 you're saying, right? This is called iterative do statements. Iterative do statements. When you say iterative do statements, so iterative do statement, this is iterative do, because this will run for 10 times. It means there are 10 iterations. 10 iterations. So in each iteration you'll check for the condition. You'll check for the condition whether it is $250,000 or not. Now let's see here. See, I am running the loop for 25 times, and you're also using until capital greater than $250,000. So what it does is it will run the loop. Now it will run this, it will run this, and it will check. Once it is run, these two statements are run, it will check for the condition. It will check for the condition. Okay. See, as usual, it will initialize year value to 1, 1 less than or equals to 25. Yes, it is true. So it will come inside the loop, and whatever statements you have, that will execute. Once these statements are executed, the first thing it will do is it will check for this condition, whether the capital is greater than $250,000 or not. If it is greater than $250,000, it will stop there. If it is not, if the condition is false, then it will increment. So year value will be 2. Again, it will execute these statements. Again, it will check for the condition. So, okay. Okay. So at 21 year, when the year is 21, it crossed 25,000. I mean, it exceeded 250,000. 250,000. It exceeded $250,000. So it stopped there. So any questions on this until and iterative do statements? Any questions on this? Anyone? Or I mean, were you able to follow? Yeah, assuming there is no output. What is this?
Yes.
RAM.
So Ram,
So do I
yes, I
equals to
have a
1
doubt
to
actually.
10?
So
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
you said
So
no. What is the difference between while and until? So I have to understand, like, if for example yesterday you gave one example, like do I is equal to 1, 1 to 10 in the, if it is y is 1 into 10 in the normal case, the I should be 11 and y is 20, right? If it get fails until that
yeah,
point.
so in this case, when you don't use any output statement, see this result will be when you don't use any output statement. So when you are not using any output statement, okay, when it fails, when the loop is exceeding, let's say in your case, let me go to your example. Okay, data, some test. Okay, okay. So I equals to 1 to 10 by 1. So when this loop will terminate when I value is 11, right? When I value is 11, the condition is false. So because it has to run from 1 to 10 only. When I value is 11, condition is false. When condition is failing, what is the value that you have in y? So till let's take 10th iteration. Let's take 10th iteration. Let's take 10th iteration. So I value is 10. So what is the value in y? So 10 into 2, it will be 20. So when it is failing, when this condition will fail,
11.
11, right? So this will be replaced in PD vector to 11.
Okay.
So when I value is 11, it will come out of the loop. When it came out of the loop, what is the value that you have in y and I? That it will print it. Okay.
Okay.
But if you use output statement, let me explain this. So you have 11 and 20. But if you execute, if you mention output statement, okay, what will happen is it will not execute. Yeah, sorry, when you use output, I'm sorry, when you don't use output statement, so when I value is 11, it is failing, right? So it will not execute the statements inside that, whatever you have. When you mention output statement, so for what output statement does is it will write the values to this output data set in each iteration. So when I value is 1, what is the value of y? It's 2. So that will be written into the output data set because it will execute all the statements inside this loop. So you have two statements, y equals to I into 2 and output. So when it writes the data into the output data set, what values you have in the first iteration? I have I equals to 1 and y equals to 2. In the second iteration, I have 2 and 4. The third iteration, I have 3 and 6. In the 10th iteration, I have 10 and 20. In the 11th iteration, what do you have? It is failing, so it will not execute anything. It will not execute any statements in the 11th iteration. So it won't do anything.
Okay. If you have output statement. Okay, now
Yes.
understood.
Got it?
Got it. Coming to the while and until, if I put like this, uh, how the difference I could able to understand the while and
Okay. So until, in case of while, let's say you are given here, for example, see the difference between until and while. First, it will check for the condition. In case of until, it will first execute the statements and it will check for the condition. Okay. So the best example I have showed you here, right? So in case of until, first it will execute the statements. So what is the value in the first iteration? What is the value? You have year, I mean when it executes for the first time, year value will be 1, capital value will be 5000, okay, because 0 plus 5000 would be 5000. Next, again you are calculating interest rate on capital and you are storing in capital only. So let's say it is 5750. Now it executed all the statements, right? Now what it does, it once it executes all the statements inside the loop, it will check the condition.
okay.
What is the condition here? Capital, whether it is capital greater than $1 million or not. If this condition is true, then it will stop there itself.
Okay.
For example, here do until I greater than 2, okay, or y, let me say y value is greater than some 10, y value is greater than 10. Let me not give it here. Let me remove this output statement. Now, can you tell me I mean, what will be the output here in this case? So now it has to come inside this. First, it has to execute this statement. So what is the value of? Oh, we have not given anything, right? Let's say 2.
0, I not to initialized.
Oh, that's fine. Let's say y equals to 2. So is 2 greater than 10?
No, no, no.
False. 2 greater than. I mean, like next what it does. I mean, okay. Here we are not using any loop. Okay. I mean, we are not giving any expressions. So if I execute this, what will happen? Can you tell me? It will go into infinite loop. I mean, see, this will always, y value will be 2 only. It will not increase or decrease, right? And let me go to this example if you want. I can take this. Where is that? I'm sorry. Which slide it is? Which slide it is? It is slide number 48. 48. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is, let me write here, do until capital greater than, let me write here 15,000 or some 25,000. Okay. So in the first iteration, so inside the do, first it will not execute this condition. What it does is, it will execute this condition whatever you have inside that do loop. So in the, so you have two variables, one is capital, that's it, you have only one variable, right? Only capital. Okay, so initially it will be 0. Okay, when it executes this statement it will be 0 plus 5,000, so the answer would be 5,000. Okay, when it executes this statement, so capital into, what is that, 5,000 into, let's say it's 10%, so 0.1, so it will be 500. So 500 will be added, whatever you get result you get it here, that will be added to capital. So already you have 5,000, so 5,000 plus 500, the value will be, after the first iteration, the value will be 5,500, right? Now it will replace that 5,500 here and it will check for the condition. Okay, now it will check the condition, if whether this 5,500 is greater than 25,000 or not. It will check it. Okay, if 5,500 is greater than 25,000, then it will stop there. If this condition is true, then it will stop. If this condition is not true, it will keep on executing this statement. That's the reason it's until this condition is true, you execute these statements. Okay, now if you wanted to know how much time it will take to exceed $25,000 if I invest $5,000 every year, so you'll come to know. So if you execute 5,000 years, your capital will be 31,220. When it will be 31,220, I need that iteration as well. So I have to use, let me use output statement, then you'll understand maybe. See, in the first year, it's, let me so you started with 5,000, and at the end of first year you got this is your capital. At the end of second year, this is your total amount. At the end of third year, this is your capital amount. At the end of fourth year, it is 24,000. In the fifth year, it exceeded. It exceeded in the fifth year. So the loop will terminate after 5 years. Loop will terminate after 5 years. So this loop, whatever SAS statements you have written inside this loop, do until, that will execute first, and it will check for this condition. If this condition is true, then it will stop executing. But in case of do while, let me say here 2000, will it execute? Will I get any output here?
No, no.
In case of do while, first it will check for the condition. If this condition is true, then only it will go inside the loop. So in case, the difference between do until and do while is, in case of do until, it will execute till the condition is true. In case of, it will check the conditions after executing the statements. But in case of do while, first it checks the condition, and if that condition is true, then only it will execute the statements. That's the difference between do while and do until. Ram, you got it?
Yeah, got it. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're better. Next, nested do loops are, let's talk about nested do loops. Within a loop, if you write one more loop, it's a nested do loop. And I think we have seen the example as well yesterday, if you remember. So I think I didn't explain. So within a loop, let's say I want output in this fashion. I want output in this way: year followed by month, year followed by month, year followed by month. I wanted to generate a data for 2015. 2015 12 times I need to generate. In the same way for 2016 I need to generate the data 12 times. Okay. So the nested loop concept, how it works is the same concept, but inside a loop you will write one more loop. So here I have written do year equals to 2015 to 2016. Okay. So first it will initialize year index variable. So year value will be 2015. 2015 less than or equals to 2016. It will check for the condition. Yes, it is true. So it will come inside the loop. So for each value in this list, so what is the list you have for year 2015 and 2016, right? So for each value, it will execute this loop separately. For each value of year, this loop inside whatever you have, this loop, you have one more loop, right? This loop will be executed for each value. So for 2015, this loop will execute how many times? Again, it will execute 12 times because you have mentioned in month I equals to 1 to 12. So this for 2015 it will execute this loop 12 times. In the same way for 2016 it will execute 12 times. And here very important points here. This output statement is very important. This output is very important. So when it executes this statement, year value in the year index variable you have value 2015. Now when so this 2015 less than or equals to 2016, the condition is true, so it will come inside the loop. You come inside the loop. What do you have? You have one more loop. So again it will run this loop 12 times. So month value is 1. When it in the first iteration month value is 1. So when we are using output statement here, what variables it created so far? It created a year as well as month. So in year you have 2015, in month you have 1. So those two values will be written into output data set. In the second iteration, when month value is 2, it will come inside this loop. So you have again output. What is the value that you have in year? You will still have 2015 only. We have not overwritten. So year value is 2015, month value is 2. That will be written into this output data set. That's the concept of nested loops. A loop inside another loop. So you will have multiple index variables. So nested do loops are loops within loops. When you use nested do loops, use different index variables for each loop. Means you should not use the same index variable name for multiple loops. Okay, you have to use the different index variable, and you have to make sure for each do statement you have end statement. For each do statement you should have end statement. See here, this name and this name cannot be same, and this end statement is for this do statement and this end statement is for this do statement. So for each do statement you need to end the do statement separately with end statement. One second. Okay, nested do loops. So the same example, create. We'll try to see it in example how to use this nested do loops. Create one observation per year for 5 years, and show the earnings if you invest 5,000 per year with 7.5 interest annual interest. 7.5% annual interest compounded quarterly. See here. Uh, I wanted to calculate from year 1 to year 5, and again in each year we have quarters, right? So I wanted to calculate across each quarter as well. In first year, first quarter, what will be my interest or what will be my capital? First year, second quarter, output. See here we have what is the outer loop in the sorry, we have two loops, right? What all those? Two index variables also we have. One is year, the other one is quarter. So the year loop will run, we have mentioned in the do statement, year equals to 1 to 5. So year it will run for 5 times. So it's saying 5x, means 5 times. And the inner loop, so inner loop is quarter, so it will run for 4 times. So how many number of rows I'll get in my output? It's 5 into 4, right? Because for each year you will run the inner loop 4 times. So or else you can say for in a year you have 4 quarters, right? So it will run 4 times. So this is the output. I mean this is sample output. How could you generate one observation for each quarterly amount? Let me 56. Let me execute this and show you. You'll understand. So the concept is just nested loop. That means do I equals to this is a little boring topic, but you have to bear with me. Now see here, if I don't mention here, okay. Now when I value equals to, okay, so you know this output statement. Okay. So year value is 1, so it will go inside the loop. So year value is 1, it will go inside this loop. Here, can anyone tell me? Can anyone tell me why I didn't get 80 records? I got only 5 records. Can anyone tell me?
You use output inside.
It all depends on this output statement. Where I used output statement, I didn't use inside.
Inside
I didn't use inside this. If I use inside this, now if I execute,
like 20 times this time.
I'll get 20 times.
Yeah.
First year, first quarter. First year, second quarter. First year, third quarter. But what I want is my output. What I want is I want output in this fashion. At the end of first year, what will be my total investment or total amount balance in my account? At the end of second year, what will be my total balance? At the end of third year, what will be my total balance? At the end of fourth year, I want only summarized output. I don't want the output in this fashion. See here, I want the end value from each year. 5385. What is the second value? 11186.79. Go to 10th record. 11186. Yeah, this one. And next 12. 17435. 17435. So it all depends on where you specify this output statement. So why we got that? The reason I'll tell you. First year value is 1. So for 1, it will run this quarter 4 times, right? This value will run 4 times for 1. So when it will fail? It will fail when the quarter value is 5. When quarter value is 5, it will fail, right? And what it does, it will come out of this loop. It will come out of this loop and you have output statement. So then it will write the values. When it writes the values, what is the value you have in year? You will have in 1 in year, and in quarter you have 5, and whatever the value, this value you get it. This value you get it. This 5385. But we don't want quarter 5, so what we do is we drop it. We drop that quarter. Let me remove this quarter and execute, and you might understand. See a quarter for every time when the quarter value is 5, it will terminate, right? Because when the value is 5, because when the quarter value is 5, it will terminate. So then when it terminates, what all the values it has in capital and quarter, it will write it into output data set. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to drop that. We don't need that quarter anyway, and it all depends the output based on how you specify, how you mention this output statement. The output will come in that fashion. Okay, so this will, for year one, this will run 4 times, and when the quarter value is 5, it will fail. When it is failing, what values you have till now, what values you have created, so that will be written into this output data set. Any questions on this? Ram, you understood?
Yeah, I have one more question. Like, if I want the, quarter as well as my capital amount, I want to set both of them together
Yeah, this is what we have done, right?
in a fashion of this one.
Yeah,
This is the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, where it gets split.
first
What
year
you have
first quarter, first year second quarter, first year third quarter, first year fourth quarter.
okay, if I want to number the quarter number like one, there is one quarter.
Yeah, you have to include quarter here. Let's write here this side and drop the, don't drop the quarter.
Okay, got it.
Okay,
Yeah, got it.
anyone, any other questions on nested do loops? Okay, I'll stop for the day.